call our workshop to order, and Karen, could we do a roll call, please?
Councilmember Husnick.
Here.
Councilmember Byström.
Here.
Councilmember Munson.
Here.
Councilmember Valento.
Here.
And Mayor Bain.
Here. Our first item this evening is open forum. We will do open forum before the workshop. Is there anyone that has signed up for open forum?
I don't have anybody on the sheet.
All right. And anyone online?
No one online.
Okay. With that, we will move to the MnDOT Highway 97 topic. And Ryan, do you want to get us started?
Sure. Mayor, City Council, tonight we got Dimitri and his team here from MnDOT to talk about the Highway 97 improvements that are planned for 2025 construction. So this is kind of, something that staff's been working very closely with MnDOT for about a year and a half on, and some stuff here and there, into a concept that we support at staff level. There's a lot of safety improvements, pedestrian improvements, and just a significant improvement to this corridor. Obviously, it deals with a lot of issues and safety concerns, and we're very happy to have MnDOT here tonight to talk about this in preparation of our upcoming public engagement meeting, November 1st, which is a Tuesday. We'll be upstairs, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. So that'll give the opportunity to you guys to engage in some stakeholders that would probably be attending that, but this allows you guys a first look at that to ask any questions and help prepare yourselves, whether additional follow-up with MnDOT or staff. So with that, I'll let Dimitri take it from here on the presentation we have prepared for you guys tonight.
Thank you, Ryan. And can you clarify one more time? Planned start date is,
What's that?
the planned start date is when?
The construction?
Yeah.
2025.
Okay, thank you. Welcome. We're glad you're here.
Thank you for having me. Madam Mayor, council members, I appreciate the opportunity to come to the workshop today. I have a lot of information to share. So I'm Dimitri Tomasevich. I'm the MnDOT East Area Engineer. I've been in the East Area for a little over 7 years. Done some work with Forest Lake now, going back to Highway 61, 97 roundabouts, 11th Street, left turn lane, North Shore Trail. So quite a bit of work in this area over the time. With me today, I have Adam Josephson. He's the East Area Manager. Victor Vasses, who's the project manager for this project, and Corey Fesfog, he's our East Area Traffic Safety Engineer for this area. Depending on what questions we get from the workshop, they'll be able to help participate and answer some of those questions. Real quick on the agenda, I'm going to provide a project background. So I am going to go into a little more detail. Last time we saw each other was about 2 years ago virtually. We just gave a really high-level project delivery kickoff. Talked about some very high-level needs, but now I'd like to provide the background on how we're heading into this concept development, the needs themselves, the schedule, summary of work, and then we have a concept here on the table which we'll be able to gather around and ask questions. We also have it on the computer, but when it's a corridor, it's sometimes difficult to see it on the screen, so we brought one here along that we can take a closer look at. So to start us off, this is Highway 97, 1.8 miles of the corridor. The project is from Hornsby to Forest Road. You know this area very well. It's a 2-lane roadway connecting traffic to Interstate 35 with a mix of left turn lanes at signalized intersections. There's a number of bypasses in the area with lack of left turn lanes at those specific intersections. The speed limit on the corridor is 55 miles per hour. There's 2 existing signals at Hornsby and Everton, actually 3 existing signals at Hornsby, Everton, and Fenway. And there is some existing intersection lighting that we'll talk about will be upgraded with the project. A really quick summary of the needs. The project started out as a need for pavement improvement, and originally it was going to be a mill and overlay, and I'll get into that in a little bit more detail. Aside from the pavement itself, we've seen somewhere around 51 crashes, and this data is from 2013 and 15. We have pulled newer data, which will be available, but the numbers are fairly similar in terms of crashes along this corridor. We have drainage needs, so the stormwater drainage and pipes themselves. Lack of bike and ped facilities along this corridor. I've driven actually in this area, and I've seen folks walking along the shoulder in this little stretch. And then ADA upgrades themselves. So the ultimate goal of the project, when we meet with the public, is to improve the pavement life and the ride quality along this corridor, improve traffic flow and those bike and ped and ADA facilities along the corridor and the drainage themselves. So I'm gonna put the schedule right in the front here just to give an idea of the project timeline. We did kick off project development and started working on the concept itself. After some delay, we're back on the project. And we're expecting our first public engagement meeting, as Ryan mentioned, November 1st, just upstairs. We always get a very good turnout in Forest Lake, so I don't anticipate anything less this time around. The environmental documentation and preliminary design, we're thinking next year into next winter. Final design would follow that into summer of 2024. And as Ryan mentioned, the current desired construction date is in 2025. As project development continues, construction date is always to be determined, but right now our plan is for 2025. I have a note here that we are keeping track of other projects in the area. MnDOT's working with Chisago County and Highway 8 from 35 to Carmel. We know Washington County has some projects planned in the area, so as we make progress, we will be coordinating to make sure that the projects align and make sense from a timing standpoint. Summary of work, as I mentioned, this started out as a mill and overlay project, but it's actually heading now more towards a full reconstruct project, and I'll get into some of the reasons behind that. So we're looking to actually fully reconstruct the roadway, improve the lighting in the area as well. We were looking at raised medians along the center of the roadway, some curb and gutter, a single lane roundabout, and I'll get into that in a little bit more detail. Some access management, so some access, how that's used today would change with this concept along the corridor. And the project would update drainage, that stormwater after a rain event, how that's handled and treated. And then those bike and ped improvements, and we'll get into that as well. So before I just jump to the concept and say, here it is, I really think it's important to share some of the design considerations and the corridor challenges, and then they'll also give you an opportunity to ask some questions. You see some of those on your screen here. We'll get into most of these in a little more detail, but some challenges, some of the big ones are wetlands and soils and materials, development, which is one we've worked with city staff quite a bit on to understand upcoming development in the area, and then city utilities and some of the budgeting and scheduling. So let's get into those in a little more detail. The first one I'd like to point out on this screen, WMA, I did not define it here, but it's a wildlife management area. So it's an environmentally sensitive area. It's kind of that red block area on the west side of the screen here. As we look at connecting a trail all the way from Hornsby to the Hardwood Creek Regional Trail, that trail section in green falls in that environmentally sensitive area from a wild management area and then wetlands. There's two types here. There's the traditional type that we have to treat with a permit, and there's the DNR wetlands. And so the details of those is just more that we're in an environmentally sensitive area in this little quadrant of the green section. And what that means is we want to minimize impacts in there. So when we were looking at just the mill and overlay in a traditional rural type typical section, so you have your 12-foot lanes, 8-foot shoulders, separation before the trail, and then grading down to land, it has fairly wide impact, so we'd have to minimize those here. So the area in green, I kind of said we have to consider an urban section to bring this area into limits, so skinny up the impacts. And when I say urban, I mean introduce curb and gutter, so you don't have to go as wide. And then potentially some medians to handle that water. So the idea in this quadrant, we're an environmentally sensitive area, we have to minimize impact, so we're looking at an urban section. So as we started walking down the corridor, and I'll get into some reconstruction reasons, but we'd have to treat that stormwater management. You know, this section of road, it's fairly wet along this area, lots of mucky type of soils. So we have to carry that stormwater and then treat it somewhere prior. And in order to do that, you need curb and gutter. You need to catch that water, take it to a destination so you can treat that area. So we realized we're going to need not only skinny up an urban section in that far west quadrant, but we'll likely need curb and gutter along most of this corridor. So as we continue down some of our other challenges along the area, We also realized that we have some pretty poor soils in this area. We call them kind of muck excavation soils from a material standpoint. The area in pink, for example, we would have to excavate down at least 15 feet to take that out in order to reconstruct that road. The far right area in blue is approximately 10 feet, and then anything in between, we haven't drilled everywhere, but we'd have to learn in that area. So that reconstruction, this slide is one of the reasons why we'd have to switch from a mill and overlay to a full reconstruct. The other comment too was those areas with the bypasses, we looked at providing dedicated left turn lanes in those areas. And in order to do that, you also have to reconstruct in order to widen for those left turn lanes. I didn't show those on the screen here, but when you combine the muck excavation areas, you combine the bypass areas, and all of a sudden you have very little that you're mill and overlaying because you're practically reconstructing the entire corridor. So our scope started to change. And then as we started looking at this project, coincidentally, not at the same time, but over time, we started getting information about developments in the area. Now, this slide isn't perfect. I made some errors in trying to highlight areas, but it'll get the point across. The area in blue on the west side, we've had several coordinated meetings of potential commercial or residential developments in that area. It's right next to Room for Growing today, and it connects to Everton, or right next to Everton, the signalized intersection. So we've closely worked with city staff, and ideally, all access would come in from Everton and relieve the highway, and which would improve the safety along that area. Today, that parcel shares the access for Room for Growing, and depending on the development type, it's potential that they would have direct access to Highway 97. So we had to understand, outside from Room for Growing that has access in that area, future development coming in, the type that it is, and that little site in purple, couldn't quite fit, it's a development site. We've seen a number of requests for review in that area for Caribou Coffee, I believe twice, most recently a potential dentist location. That site is approximately 100 feet from the intersection, which is far too close for left and right turn lanes at that location. So we ultimately we encourage development, we support development and reviewing, make sure it meets standards and need from a highway standpoint, but we also want to maintain safe entrance and exit into that roadway. So we want to control access in that area. And then on the south side, the development is not planned over Quick Trip, it's just an error on my highlighting, but there is a commercial property in that area that submitted a plan with requested access onto Highway 97, again fairly close to Everton. So working in that area and then coordinating with city staff, we found out that there's a potential for future Falcon Avenue extension. So the project looked in that area as an example of what is the desired access once that gets extended, and how do we accommodate that future development. So what we've learned is that area in blue, in order to control that, median is a good opportunity to maintain that access while also maintaining access for Room for Growing as it is today, which we can see on the concept in a little bit. But specifically at where Everton isn't today, that would be a median, which would change to a right in, right out, and most of those homes on the north side would use Everton as their primary access. So I went into a lot of detail here, but what I'm really trying to say is development causes us to evaluate what is the right access type in this section of roadway, and we've learned that that urbanized section with some median potential to control access is something we should look at here. So now as we continue to march down the corridor, closer to Forest Road, another development came in. Again, this is all over scoping the project, so we're constantly adjusting in our scope of the project. Norhard Factory development, which I think is fairly far along in progress, and we worked very closely with them in determining what their access would be like and making sure the project accommodates their future right turn lane into that facility. They wanted access onto Highway 97. Ideally, they would have maybe had access to Forest Road. But this is a section where I think a lot of folks are in agreement with the roundabout. Right in, right out is really the best access here from a MnDOT standpoint and what we would recommend and would encourage here. So again, another median would allow the control of that. Norhard seemed very open to that, and so it's just a matter of utilizing the site correctly. And all these were coming in at different times of project planning. So I'm going to keep marching along and talk a little bit about Forest Road. When we worked on Highway 61 and 97, we had some concerns about Forest Road, but it was just outside the project scope, and we couldn't actually fit in a left turn lane at that time, and we still can't fit in a left turn lane in both directions. Ultimately, the ideal improvement at that location is mitigating that access by closing it or utilizing it as a right in, right out. So meeting with city staff and understanding the importance of that intersection, hearing a little bit from the businesses on the south side, today they already take a right out, use the roundabout, and head in the opposite direction. So we think the right in, right out with a median closure is the correct solution at Forest Road. And then meeting with city staff, they introduced us to a past study that was done. I believe it was called the McCullough Property Study, if I named it correctly. But the idea there was it looked at what is the potential future improvements in this site. Now, although this roundabout next to Forest Road isn't going forward or isn't planned, there was a lot of discussion if we close Forest Road with this project, is a roundabout at Fenway an option with this project? So the amount of reconstruction that is occurring at Fenway, we thought, well, it wouldn't be that much more to reconstruct. Why don't we explore its feasibility? And so the current concept is showing a roundabout at Fenway, which would also then work with some of the median that's being proposed in the area because it would allow you to take a right in, right out and use the roundabout to head in the opposite direction. And we'll take a closer look in that in just a little bit. So utilizing this information that was provided, this is just an example, but along this stretch of road, there would be a median that would be installed and a roundabout that we would look at with this project. I'll highlight these slides really quick. We work with city, they have some city force main, you have some city force main that went into the project. So understanding those impacts and any widening to that new force main that's going into along the highway. And then that Hardwood Creek Trail. So today there's really not a connection to the Hardwood Creek Trail, and trying to understand where is a good spot and how can we connect to that area, and knowing there's some other utilities, some really important utilities in that area as well. So this red line represents, is this an option that we can provide from Highway 97 onto Hardwood Creek Trail? So I just gave a lot of information of all these needs and all these challenges that popped up during concept development. We literally started with the mill and overlay project, and all these things just we kept discovering throughout the process. And when you put all these needs together, you can kind of see in this picture, there's a median need there, a curb and gutter, a roundabout, and all of a sudden it kind of naturally started to form this urbanized section along Highway 97. So I thought this background is fairly in-depth, but it's very important to understand how we got to this particular concept as we went along during our study. So what is the proposed concept? And we'll look at the layout here, and I do have it on the screen for any places we need to zoom in. We're looking at a 45-mile-an-hour design speed. Today it is a 55-mile-an-hour road. We've heard expressions that, the importance of slowing traffic down, especially with the consideration of the trail on the south side. So the elements of design, so characteristic change of the road, that's one way you can try to encourage the change in that speed. Arbitrarily, MnDOT can't just go out there and lower the speeds from, say, 55 to 45. We have statutory requirements in that, in setting those speed limits. However, design elements can help modify the behavior of the drivers. And so when you're going from a wide open roadway section to something that maybe has medians and curb and gutter, feels a little more constrained, that potentially has the effect of slowing traffic down. The construction of a roundabout will have its own slowing down and then exiting the roundabout as well. So big picture, we're looking at a 45-mile-an-hour design. Once the project is complete, we will be required to do a speed study to better understand what that traveling public is going at, and that will help us actually set the speed limit. But from a design speed standpoint, we're working with 45 miles per hour. The typical section is kind of hard to see here, but we're looking at 6-foot shoulders. That does include that gutter pen. 11-foot through lanes. When we talk about through lanes, we don't count the gutter pan, so it's actually 13 feet, so it'll feel a little bit wider there, but we would say it's 11-foot through lane plus the 2-foot gutter pan. And then, depending on the area, 4 to 6 foot medians, a small boulevard, and then the 10-foot trail. So ultimately, it'll feel urbanized, like an urbanized section. And usually the question I get is from an emergency vehicle standpoint, and staff did raise this question. I wanted to make sure I brought up some information since we last met. So that typical road cross section, if you take the 6-foot shoulder, the 11-foot through lane, the 2-foot gutter pan, you're at about 19 feet. And so we reached out to the city fire chief, found out the fire vehicle width is 8 foot 4 inches. The private vehicle restricted is about 8 foot 6 inches. So you're just over 16 feet, and we have a 19-foot section, and we have mountable curbs. So meaning that an emergency vehicle should be able to get through. If there's an issue, the curbs are mountable, so it can mount the curb and go around as well. So that was one of the questions: is if you have a breakdown, can an emergency vehicle get by with a 6-foot shoulder and a 12-foot lane? And this quickly shows that it has that ability. And then as far as length, I think the current concept is approximately 1.4 miles out of the 1.8 that it has medians. So that would be a change, and especially for a couple of the streets and the homeowners, and we can look at that actually on the layout here. The last two things I really wanted to cover is how we're going to build it. This is usually a question. This is a really challenging location. There's not a lot of alternate routes. We also don't have a lot of width to just widen out the roadway. And so that's a very good question. What we know is we're going to have a need for a 2-year construction project. We'll evaluate, options to shorten that, some accelerated construction methods. Are there things we can do from a prep work standpoint that will reduce impacts? We'll definitely take into account maintaining local access. That's usually a question that comes up. Maintaining business access, obviously utility impacts, and then, as I mentioned, those poor soils, it's a lot of work to get those excavated. So they're going to have their own challenges, but that'll go into that construction staging evaluation. And most certainly city input in those other projects in the area, consideration how we stage and detour that traffic. But I do admit it'll be challenging, but it's more up for the task, but it'll be a little further down the evaluation process to fully understand how to build it. These are all the pieces that will go into that consideration. And then all options are on the table, so that means directional closure. Maybe we work on one side and only have traffic in one direction. Maybe we can do some temporary widening as long as we restore the roadway. And then maybe even a full closure while maintaining local access, or building it in sections, either one section at a time out of the 3 that between the signals, or 2 sections at a time. So I wanted to focus on that question a little bit because we don't fully have the answers yet, but it's an important one that we're going to consider further down the line of project development. And then future topics and things to come next. We already talked about the open house. That's a big one. Forest Lake always has a very good turnout. I think we're going to do, actually I know we're going to do a virtual presentation and an in-person open house here. So we've found that from the pandemic process, there's actually a really good turnout of folks that come virtually that just aren't able to attend in-person open houses. And then there's also a turnout that really wants to come in person because it's a very different feel to be able to ask questions. So we're going to do both. And then future topics, there's more to come. We'll talk about signals and lighting. We'll talk about cost participation and agreements, the trail maintenance, and really city approval back to you for municipal consent. So there's a lot more process to come. We're just really at that first stage of getting towards a concept, getting public input, and then actually moving the project towards actual development. So with that, I'd like to just share the concept, and I'd be happy to pull it up on the screen and walk you through the concept, or we have a paper version here that I have additional staff that we can answer those questions as we look at the concept and see the different streets and how things change. I'll leave it up to you which version you prefer, in person or on the laptop. I can walk you through it.
So maybe helpful to, could we maybe walk through first on
Absolutely.
screen and then I'll go down and I think it may be helpful to do a round of questions first also before we
Absolutely.
see it. I always appreciate hearing everyone else's questions too, so.
Absolutely. What I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in here quick, and it's a good point. I should pause for a second and see if there's any questions, and then we can walk, or would you like for me to walk through the layout first?
Any burning questions right now, or should we walk through layout? walk through layout?
Okay.
And we can circle back on questions.
I will admit this, it can get a little difficult with the size, but I'll do my best to kind of walk from west to east. I'm going to zoom in even closer. We're limited in screen size. So this is just at Hornsby, and most of the area right at Hornsby really doesn't change much. It'll likely just be a mill and overlay. It was recently, the Hornsby itself was recently reconstructed, and I think they milled and overlay through this section. But that pretty much stays the same. This area in the middle is just the painted median that's out there today. And as we walk further west, I'm just going to zoom out just a little bit. I wanted you to be able to see the pink area. The pink area is that wildlife management area, and also the wetland area that we're really concerned about. So in this area, what we've done is brought the limits in by minimizing this green space, which is essentially the boulevard between the roadway and the trail, to kind of our minimum, which is 6 feet. So really to show the DNR that from an environmental impact, we're doing all we can to minimize those impacts, but still being able to provide some sort of a boulevard and we get that trail. And we'll have to work through them to see if that's acceptable to them, but this is just our first concept look at that.
To be clear, DNR may make you shorten the footprint, is that?
I think the DNR will ask us a number of questions if we evaluate this option or option A or option B that they will come up with, and we'll have to see if we've thought of that and provide responses, and ultimately see if this is an acceptable footprint for them.
That is just a dense traffic area with a lot going on coming up to the Divergent Diamond intersection, so it'd be nice to keep some level of boulevard and some separation. I'd worry about having that traffic immediate, or that trail right next to traffic lanes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. As we work our way towards the signal, what you'll see here in red, again, I apologize for the size, but the area in red is that raised median, so a concrete median like you're used to seeing on the roadway. And I'll first point out this access for room for growing is being left alone as is. So that business will maintain its access. To the north here, this highlight is that potential development site that we've been kind of coordinating with the city staff on. Depending on how that site develops, if it's, there's a potential that this lower portion could utilize this existing access, or depending on the development size, we'll continue to push for Everton as the primary access point for that. But the big picture is for room for growing. They have an existing dedicated left. And they're far enough back from the intersection that should be able to work with the dedicated left turn lane that's there. The small potential development site, you can see they will have a change. This median will prevent that from having a left in, especially with its proximity. We just don't think that's a safe move to do a left in and a left out. The median will mitigate that, and it also has a nice lead into the intersection itself. Continuously here, this section in purple is the trail that's going to continue on the south side all the way to the Harbor Creek Trail.
Will that intersection allow for a U-turn, or is it the one kind of near Quick Trip there?
As far as will a U-turn be allowed or permitted there? I think I'd have to check with Corey. Do we typically sign a no U-turn at signalized intersections? We don't. So I believe if someone were to do a U-turn, they would be able to do one. But maintaining that access for room for growing, and depending on how that site develops, they'll still be able to utilize that access. So I see the need for that U-turn is very minimal.
Yeah, I was just a little bit kind of concerned about it, doing a U-turn and potentially hitting an inlet to a commercial development site.
We share those concerns when it comes to the U-turn at those intersections.
So I didn't know if it was just something that was, possible, or if under the circumstances it, would be not allowed.
Councilmember Byström, that was very thoroughly discussed at that intersection with the fear of how many U-turns would be generated if that full access to room for growing wasn't left the way it is. So that's why it is now. Obviously, a driver can do whatever they want in, a corridor, whatever we tried to plan for or not. There's always going to be those exceptions, but the main reason the access for room for growing is as is because of the U-turn discussion that was generated.
This next area is probably one of the first bigger changes that you'll see. So the median continues from Everton and continues east. On the south side, just to the right of Holiday here, this site is another site that we just recently saw some development plans. I believe it's currently on pause, but we saw a fairly extensive development proposal in this area. They do have access to Everton itself, but working with city staff, you can't see it here, but we have a note here of the potential future Falcon extension here that would occur in the future. So what the project is doing, is I'm going to zoom in, is the project is planning for that access to be a right-in, right-out, and you can see the layout is planning for a right turn lane that's not there today. It also has a stub for that potential future Falcon Avenue extension. And so this particular site would have right-in, right-out access, but they have full access off of the signalized intersection. So working with city staff, we realized the type of development, it would need more than just the one, so we agreed on a right-in, right-out as an acceptable access there. And the first big changes, what I was talking about, is this neighborhood to the north. The access at Falcon does change to a right-in, right-out, but they do have direct access to a signalized intersections that allows a left-in and a left-out. And so that's the first change along this corridor. As you continue east here, the next big change is this planned roundabout at Fenway. So as I mentioned, we're already reconstructing quite a bit of this area. This particular signalized intersections preliminary looks like a roundabout will work here fairly well. And so that would be the first change. The driveway to the north maintains its driveway access. It doesn't look like a city street, but we've built roundabouts like this where they are able to maintain their driveway access. Continuing east, you do see a median in the area, and we'll talk about this change here for Floral and Fondant. Right now, this concept is showing a median through those two intersections, so if they wanted to head towards Highway 61, they would do a right out, utilize the roundabout, and continue back east. But in terms of coming back into the intersection, they would have to go to Highway 61, utilize that roundabout, and come back and head into their driveway. One of the reasons we talked about medians through here, and I'll focus on that topic, I wanted to zoom out so I can give a little bigger picture for you. We'll focus on this quadrant here. Is this development to the south, as I mentioned, and providing a right-in, right-out for them, and then specifically Forest Road. So we did like a mini access study, I'll call it, that we presented to city staff, and it showed a number of options. So on the screen, I'll try to show with the mouse. We looked at closing the median at Forest Road and trying to understand where can we end that would still be effective and not have that U-turn concern that you just mentioned. So folks coming down Forest and constantly doing that U-turn, especially with that commercial property coming in on the south side. So we introduced different points along this roadway of trying to end that median section. And that's where that McCullough property study came in. We started talking about the roundabout. And so working with city staff, the preference recommendation was there to run a median through this area, change the signal to a roundabout, and use that as a mitigation measure to do that U-turn in that area. So that's kind of how that roundabout came about, and the study of closure at Forest Road for those safety improvements. So for folks in this area, that would be a change at Floral and Fondant, and that's one of the areas we're probably going to hear and want to hear from the residents in the neighborhood and other folks during our open house.
Would you also expand that same impact, so the residents that live along Forest Road that today are accustomed to turning, so Forest Road north of north of 97, yeah, right there. Is that going to be that's going to require a right turn only?
That would be a right turn only, so they no longer will have that left out to towards Highway 61. So their new way of accessing that area would either just head north to, I believe it's 11th, and head east that way, Or I suppose the option would be to make that right, utilize the new roundabout and head back. So depending on which portion of the road they would live on and which direction they're traveling in, that would be a change in pattern. But from a safety standpoint, that would be improvement. And I know I provided a lot of info, but we looked at the opportunity to provide both dedicated left turn lanes at this intersection, and it simply just doesn't fit with the spacing. Geometrically, it just doesn't work. And then hearing from those businesses on the south side, they already make the right to go to the roundabout. Simply putting one of those pork chops without a median that says you go right, right only, it's a pork chop that looks basically like this that forces you to go right. We find that that's violated quite a bit. So most of the time it's violated because there's no median, so folks will go around the pork chop and still make the left turn lane. So the only solution is a median, and that's where we did that mini study and hearing from the businesses to the south. And then I also know from a city staff standpoint that the fire station is to the north of here. We extensively talked about that area. The proximity of the roundabout is fairly close. It does add some time to make the U-turn on the roundabout, but it's within a fairly close distance between the two streets in order to head north. So that was a really quick way to walk you through the layout. I think the only other thing I didn't point out, and maybe I'll do that here, I didn't point out some of the other local residences. But the residences on the north side here would also have only a right in, right out. But what we're doing here is we're accommodating a wider 10-foot shoulder so that mail truck and garbage trucks can still provide service to the folks in the area. When you go to that urban section at 6 foot, it's simply not wide enough to provide that mail truck and garbage truck service. There are a few other driveways on the south side along the corridor further west. And we can see those a little bit on the layout as well. The layout will be updated with notes and information for the public open house. We're still working on that, but it's a conceptual process. So I provided a lot of information with you, and I really appreciate the workshop opportunity because I can share this detail versus a traditional council meeting where you kind of have to provide a short agenda of information. But also, we haven't seen you in 2 years, and a lot has happened in that time frame. And that's the kind of the level of detail I wanted to share today. So with that, I'm happy to entertain any questions. If I don't know any answer, the staff here as well will be able to provide. If there's any specific questions, we have a layout on the table, and then obviously after today, we're available as well. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Council, what questions might we have?
If you're gonna dig down 16 feet in some areas, that means road closure in my mind, and so that's gonna be a real challenge because where are you gonna put traffic there, you know? So what's gonna happen there? How are we gonna handle that?
That's a very good question. The staging and construction of that, I think we're aware of those details. We're going to consider the need to maintain local access. We're going to need to consider the need to maintain business access. And we're going to also consider one-way directional, so possibility can we do half at a time? So can we maintain traffic in just one direction? Can we stage it? So instead of the entire corridor, can we only close a portion of it while maintaining access to the rest of it? So those level of details are, we're just not quite there yet, but I share your concern or question on that, and that's something we're gonna have to put our thinking hats on and do some work.
I know you mentioned it earlier, but to me, I thought, boy, that's gonna be a tough area.
Agreed.
And so,
And it's not only tough for the locals, but it's a major thoroughfare off of 35 into Forest Lake.
definitely, yeah.
And is there
Commuters.
consideration being given to utilizing 32, County Road 32? I remember when we had some construction previously that we opened that up temporarily.
Broadway Avenue, was it Broadway Avenue?
No, 32, 11th.
Yeah, but did we do that when we did Broadway?
When you did Broadway,
Looking at Ryan.
the new bridge went in and
Yeah.
it provided some access actually to go southbound 35, went through the rest area. And then northbound, we had a temporary access off of the freeway onto Eureka, yeah. So I'd say at this point, everything's on the table. That one worked out well. I know there was some controversy taking it out, so there's that. That's in my head too. I was in this room fighting that question, but I think it's all on the table. It's gonna be a tough area to construct. and there's a lot of people that want to use it, so.
But it needs to be done.
It all
There's no
needs to be
question about that. I'm not arguing that. It
And
needs
I-
to be done.
You know, I know there's work scheduled for that area too, so it's just kind of the cadence of everything, you know, will that be done before this starts, and I don't know. Those are the kind of questions that I have, and I don't know that we have answers for them yet. One of the other things that came up for me is you talked about kind of the Falcon folks living kind of down along the lake there, being able to utilize, I think that's 210th to get back up to the light where kind of Quick Trip is located there. My question around that, is there any city consideration for improvement to 210th? I would imagine we'd see a pretty significant increase in traffic down that road ultimately. So would there be consideration to improvements to 210th along in there?
You're really not gonna generate many more trips within that neighborhood, right? A lot of the people are already going to that signal because it's a controlled intersection, especially if they're coming out and wanting to head westbound or, you know, having to cross lane traffic, right? So, you know, you can count the houses, and the number of houses per that signal aren't really equaling that amount that would increase traffic to the level of the existing neighborhood. Now, if you're talking about the development area, that's where we've been working very closely, what might be allowable in there, and or having the adequate roadway right away in there and stuff like that. And then there's some stuff that's even being explored further outside that box that's dealing with the private area too. So there's been ongoing conversations with everything, but overall, that existing neighborhood, if that's only access is out to Everton Avenue now, that's a huge safety improvement by forcing them to that intersection. With retaining that right in, right outs, you know, that gives them another way if they went into town or something. You know, obviously with a controlled median and stuff like through that here, that's gonna, you know, limit some of the access. It's also gonna save a lot of lives. And that's where, you know, with the support of the roundabout at Fenway, that's gonna provide easy turnaround access in some of this corridor, but it's also gonna act as a safety improvement that's gonna slow traffic down. And you're heading at a yellow light, generally most people are punching it, right? And we're going straight when we punch it, so just think how much your speed keeps going up. Regardless of what's happening when you're coming into that roundabout, you're gonna be forced to slow down to make that curve. So overall, when you put all these components together and you think about how they intermix, there's gonna be a huge safety improvements. It's gonna be for vehicle traffic safety and pedestrian safety. Right now, how many times do you come out here and see people walking or biking down this corridor? There's no room, the shoulders are in poor condition, there's no lighting, and there's no safety zone reaction area for anything. I'm surprised we don't hear more about what happens down there. I mean, even when I buzz out here tonight, every once in a while there's people walking, you know, especially when we get darker earlier, there's people always out there on that shoulder at night. And what we got going forward here is gonna be just a dramatic improvements. Gonna be some change, so you know, there's be some opinions that come with it, but I think it's much needed improvements that are gonna be moving forward versus having a conversation about a fatality.
Other questions or points of consideration? Council, do you want to go to the big section? I'm happy to take a break and move down there if we want to do that. Otherwise, personally, seeing the zoom in on the screen was, I feel like I personally got kind of the visual I needed, but if we want to kind of go down and have a look at the larger sheet, we can do that.
Whatever, it's been pretty clear on here exactly what's gonna happen.
Logistics and notification, do all of the impacted neighborhoods get kind of mailed notification of the public meeting? I just want to make sure that.
Yes, we have a surrounding area that we're gonna do a direct mailing to those homes and all those neighborhoods to the north. Almost as far as 11th, we'll get a notification for the public open house.
And MnDOT's working with the city. Dan Undum will be getting information from MnDOT so where he can upload on city's social media.
We also do a news release, we do a Facebook blitz, we post on our website, so we really try to advertise, and as I mentioned, historically, we've had a really good turnout in Forest Lake, so I expect nothing less.
Good. One thing you mentioned at a high level was just improved lighting. Overall, what would you highlight as like lighting improvements for the corridor?
Just really bring it up to today's standard. I think today there's some power pole lighting out there, and then I think just existing lighting on the current signal systems. And so that would just be upgraded to the current LED standards along that section.
Other questions?
There'll be some coming up, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think the part that, you know, because you've accommodated the roundabout at Fenway, that kind of answers for the concern around access at Fondant and Falcon. My bigger concern is just the feedback and the perception of those that travel south on Forest. And I always think about the morning trip to the schools, right? Because they're coming down Forest and they want to head east to go towards the schools. And that's going to force either them to go north to 11th or them to go to that roundabout. And that's, you know, a little bit of a further distance. But I also completely understand the safety concerns on not having that designed in that fashion. So I think that's just part of the feedback we need to be ready for.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that-
I'm kind of excited about that because that is
Yes.
a
Yeah.
terrible area.
Correct.
That-
And it has been
Yeah,
for years.
I see cars trying to make a left turn, eastbound, trying to make a left turn onto Forest Boulevard, and the rest of the traffic is passing on the right. And so it's just a horrible situation there, because we travel that road quite a bit.
That specific intersection was probably the most discussed out of anything through the whole corridor. Just gotta give you one chance to go do it. Drive south down Forest Road in the morning prior to school and try to make a left turn. Don't do it, just go
No.
right.
Right,
But
right.
just sit there and feel it and look and see how your sight distance to the east is very limited horizontally and vertically because of that bridge and the curvature of that other, you know, the roundabout expressway kind of lane coming. But then you also got a lot of traffic coming from the west. So you look left, you think you're good, then you start pulling out and oops, there's somebody coming already, and, you know. So
And the sun.
definitely go to that intersection during school prior to the city council public engagement. And so you can feel what that actually feels like.
Yeah, it's rough.
Would a roundabout make sense on Everton? At the quick trip intersection there?
Fenway?
Or Fenway, excuse me.
I think we looked at it, but the volumes start pushing us into a two-lane configuration, at least in the eastbound. And a lot of your safety benefits, then you'll lose a lot of them with going to a second lane.
Oh, thanks.
Oh, you're talking the, what's now
Yeah.
the light.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm always, I think the public thinks that we have greater leeway related to speed limits than we do, and think we can just wave a wand and change a speed limit, and I'm always surprised that even MinDOT can't, you know, you have to meet the warrants. You mentioned that it'll be designed for 45, but you're not sure that you'll actually hit the requirement to actually move the speed limit. What would be the factor that would, like, that you would expect, maybe you're not gonna hit the threshold to be able to move that speed limit? Just out of curiosity.
I'll give my very high-level version, and if you
Yeah.
want a lot more
I
detailed,
know
Corey
full
can
traffic
share.
study, Yeah.
But my high-level version is, once the project is constructed, we would be required to do a speed study, and that just monitors the speeds along that corridor. And then we have to measure the 85th percentile speed, because that's the sweet spot in terms of safety, where some are below or some are above. And that's what determines how we set the speed limit on the state highway. And that's not, again, not someone in the office, it's just a statutory process of doing an engineering study and setting that speed limit.
Understood.
Ryan did point out something that I missed, so if I have a couple minutes, I'd like to point it out. Specifically at, let's see, specifically at Fondant and Floral, there was some discussion about providing a left at Floral and seeing if an opportunity would then allow, instead of traveling all the way to Highway 61, to do a U-turn at Floral, a left turn lane at Floral, and then also a U-turn, I misspoke there, a left turn lane at Fondant, and then a U-turn to Floral. So we did look at a couple of things, and we have kind of here on the layout an alternate option that it's still under consideration. We're working through internally from a department standpoint, from a maintenance and other issues. But the first option we looked at was this particular median would extend far enough out that it would not allow a left turn out. And this particular median would actually cross over. So it would create a little channel there that would restrict the left out, but still allow a left in. And we've studied a couple other corridors. I met with our maintenance folks, and that particular option just isn't feasible to maintain from a snow maintenance standpoint. So that particular channelized left that really boxes you in, doesn't allow a left out, but a left into the street, just doesn't work. So we had to dismiss that option. So we did draw up a potential option with full access. And we're still studying this concept and potentially bringing this to the public as well. Bringing this to the public as well, but we're still working through the internal process. But what it would do is it would allow that left turn lane and then a little bit of wider shoulder here that would allow that U-turn to connect into the next street over. I didn't show it as our first option because our preferred is to have a median section through here. But we're looking at the traffic levels at the two streets and what that volume would be. We're looking from a maintenance standpoint. And so we did draw up, is it feasible to have full access there? Definitely. But we're evaluating if that's a good concept option to pull forward. It's on the layout today that the public would see, and that would be part of that comment period. And then we're also evaluating the safety considerations with allowing that left. So thanks for pointing that out, Ryan. I did forget to talk about that.
Very good. Council, any other questions?
Not for me.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here tonight, and we look forward to seeing you again on the 1st. Look forward to getting some invites out, and as you mentioned, Forest Lake always shows up, and I expect that'll be the case again for this one. I just look at this overall project, and certainly, much needed, a lot of safety improvements, a lot of trail recreation improvements. We've got a lot of development that's happened since this, was last under major construction, and it'd be just nice to add that connectivity. Maybe my one point, and I know this is already on staff's mind, but I think about the impact to Eureka of what that construction period might look like. Am I saying that? Is it Eureka? The west side of Clear Lake? I'm drawing a blank. Is it Eureka? Yeah. Yes, okay, thank you.
It is.
I'm just concerned on that street in that condition and what, folks may be creative in finding their own path and what that means for that section of already in tough shape. So something we'll have to be planful of as well. So, all right, any other comments or points? All right, thanks for making the trip up tonight, and we'll see you in a few weeks.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate all the time today.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
All right, I think we are ready to move on to our lake access discussion, and Abby?
Thank you, Mayor Vane. The city of Forest Lake owns dozens of parcels of land that connect to our lakes. Some of these are by fee title, many of them are just platted, so platted right-of-way that ends into the lake. Homeowners are often seeking city guidance on what can or cannot be done in those areas. And this year was no different. The summer was no different in fielding a lot of phone calls about the use of these parcels. Predominantly, most property owners are asking, what can somebody do there? What can't they do there? And really, after reviewing some of this, and I'm sure many of you already know this, you have a lot more history of Forest Lake than I do, or the community that I do, so we don't have any regulations on the use of these parcels of land. And so therefore, when you do have somebody that may be launching a boat regularly every year or every weekend, or bringing their jet skis down them, and there are areas which we have not wanted to encourage those launching points, we don't have any sort of ability to stop them from doing this. because there's nothing in the code that says they can or cannot do that. So we talked as a staff about creating an ordinance that would at least provide some framework for use of these as well as enforcement of these. So tonight before you, you see a red line version of an ordinance that would create some parameters for these lake accesses. Predominantly, if it is a motorized vehicle access, it needs to be signed. That without any signage, it wouldn't be allowed to have non-motorized lake access. The exemption would be snowmobiles that are by state law exempted. That we wouldn't permit watercraft parking or dock creation because we are finding that it's easy to build a dock sometimes on these and nobody ever even knows. And then any violation of it is a misdemeanor of the city code. So staff is bringing this to the council tonight to gauge the council's interest in creating an ordinance amendment of this nature that helps better define the use of these parcels, specifically to help staff help maybe enforce some of the policies that the city may have had in the past but haven't necessarily written down into the city code. So my recommendation to you is to discuss it, and then should you be interested in moving forward with this ordinance, direct staff to move forward with scheduling this for formal consideration of an ordinance amendment.
Thank you, Abby. Council, open it up for discussion and consideration. Questions, points
Well,
of feedback?
one word from me, finally. The very first complaint I got as a city council member was an access point issue, access to the lake. And it was really problematic, and we needed to do kind of a study, an assessment back then. So I'm glad that we're finally getting around to doing this. Are we going to just, are we going to look at those access points individually then, Abby, and make an assessment about, I mean, is it just a free-for-all? If, I mean, we know we can't allow motorized unless they're marked for motorized, but are we going to allow access from any of those points for like non-motorized? Are we gonna look at closing some of them? Are we?
So as written, any of those that would not be designated or signed for motorized would be available for non-motorized, foot traffic, kayakers, canoers, that sort of thing. This is kind of a multi-step process.
Okay.
Our first would be create an ordinance. I didn't mention, but we did also talk with both watershed districts and the Lake Association about this. They're all in support of this ordinance, just starting the framework. They all have indicated that they would love to be a part of future conversations about the use of these. I don't know necessarily that there'd be a systematic review of each of them. Currently, those places that the city, I think, knows that there's launching, we've signed, you know, that are appropriate, the public access points and that sort of thing. I imagine that as time goes on, it may be a case by case of problem access areas that we review those sorts of things. We really haven't started kind of scoping out what are those next steps.
Okay.
Right now really was just kind of first step tool of let's actually codify some of the policy we've maybe had in place.
Yeah, this is great. I just know that, you know, it did come up that there were some real safety and liability concerns at some of these points along the lake, and I was just wondering, I'm probably jumping ahead of where you are in this process, but I just wanted to, you know, articulate that concern, and that has been a concern among some members of the community.
Other questions?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a written rule about any of it, really, and that's been the problem. And so, at least getting it in writing would be a lot easier for staff and everybody else that gets involved with these conflicts, or whatever you want to call them. I'm not positive how it should be written, but I think they should be studied and get something out there that we can look at, discuss.
One of the points that I wonder if it's worth consideration is, it strikes me that some of the access points that we have indicated are, I think we would look at certain access points and say it doesn't make sense to use this access point for boat launch. But I suspect that some of those same access points are used traditionally for lake access in the winter. And that, there might be some of those places where that is okay, and that, and maybe not. Maybe there's a whole host of other reasons why we should not allow any lake access. But I think it might be worth consideration of, are there certain points where we are going to allow for winterized lake access, but we wouldn't allow for summer boat launch? Somebody's driving.
Yep, I completely understand, yes.
And I think that's a different consideration than somebody is parking a trailer and launching a boat, which is what we have today.
I know when I talked about this with the Lake Association, they did bring up the wintertime freeways, my words, not theirs, but just the constant
what
volume
happens.
of traffic.
Yes.
And so that would be something that we can look into.
And that also, I think, allowing for several of them might limit, I think right now there's many, and I think some of those places, it just doesn't make sense, but people do it anyway. And so if we were to allow for some, it might just be a nice compromise where we haven't limited those points to only the more traditional DNR access points. So finding a happy medium for, vehicle access to the lake in the winter.
And I think this brings me kind of full circle to now we've got a code compliance issue we potentially have to deal with. And we've had lots of conversation about, and I like the word compliance versus enforcement. I just think it's a little gentler. We've talked at length about the need for additional staffing in that code compliance area. And so, I'm just kind of wondering what direction that may be headed with, adding some additional compliance issues, to the city's plate.
It's definitely been positions that community development have identified as needing in our staffing plan. They get vetted out during, budget proposals and reviews, and so I think it'll just be a matter of this council and your predecessors keeping an eye on that as you're having those budget discussions and reviewing how can you incorporate, how can we expand the services with the system we have. I would defer to Patrick, though he knows more than I do.
Again, it's a struggle of positions and how many we can get and where the most need is. A lot of the complaints immediately go to the police department, obviously, with there's somebody launching boats or somebody's parked a trailer on it or they built a dock. So this will give the police a tool. But we do have to look at enforcement. We know that other property maintenance and other enforcement issues are being handled through the building department right now and actually have done a pretty good job with that since helping out there. Community service officers as well in the future that we've identified would be possibly a good compliance officer as well for us. So it's just a matter of balancing positions versus the need and how we don't ask you to raise the budget 20%. So.
Well, it's just one of those cans we've been kicking a little bit, and I know, we get concerns expressed to us from members of the community about, code issues.
It's an ongoing issue. There's no doubt there are ongoing issues. Again, the building department has done a good job taking over those, but sooner or later, we'll have to get even more involved with code issues. It's one of those painful things of growing as a community and trying to find the funds to hire people to do it.
So one of the points of frustration that I've heard many times from people whose property is adjacent to these is, one is the access and the traffic that happens, but then secondly, the city's lack of, that we don't have a strong maintenance plan for those, so we aren't removing dead trees, we're not, some of them are quite grown up with brush. And so I noticed that section B, we have a requirement for homeowners or landowners adjacent to the right-of-way. I just have a little bit of a, I don't know, it just makes me a little unsettled, I guess, to have a requirement that they maintain that to a standard, but that we as the city aren't in a position to maintain our portions either. And maybe I'm misreading that, but I think that there are several homeowners that have raised this concern that would then look to this and say, you know, city, where are you maintaining that standard of maintenance? And I wish we could get to that standard of maintenance, but I'm just not sure we're prepared to bite that off, or if maybe we've already assessed what that looks like.
No, I think the standard of maintenance is in question. Again, talking with watershed districts, but what should that be? Better if those accesses are natural and can filter the water that runs off. Or do you want, you know, golf course type grass that goes down there, or do you want it paved with asphalt? There is no standard for those. The city has traditionally left those as natural areas. And sometimes they look better, some look better than the others. It's just, we have no standard for however many there are. There's just so many that I'm not sure how we could maintain them all at this point. Again, it goes back to, do we need more staff to maintain 100 access points on the lake?
And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that some of them are allowed to be uninterrupted in their wild state, but then we do have the requirement that adjoining property owners maintain their portion by 8 inches, so what's the, like,
So if I may, Mayor Bain, the section B, so 9805 section B exists in the code today. That's not being proposed to be changed at all. And that was really designed for like boulevard areas, so that area between your property line and maybe a sidewalk or the sidewalk and the road, that there's grass there. That's really what the intention was of those. I think we can work with our legal team to maybe better refine that. That doesn't obligate an adjacent homeowner to maintenance.
Yeah, as far as an access is concerned, I think we're just looking for trouble to try to have the neighbors maintain that. They'd have an argument.
And
If I don't own it,
And
you pick, you know.
yeah,
I think spell it out. I know we're referencing it, we're referencing the other code, but I think spelling it out there is also important, just so that it's clear on which portions we're expecting to be maintained versus which portions are the homeowners able to take the same approach that the city has taken.
sure. That's a great suggestion. Thank you.
I guess that brings me back, though, to the assessment piece of, you know, and obviously that would take some time, and looking at taking these on a case-by-case basis and saying, you know, this just needs to be closed, you know, and maybe not be an access point to the lake. I mean, I just don't know that we can have it both ways. I think if we're gonna allow the access, we have a role in maintaining that space.
Yeah, and the biggest issue is getting rid of the access is almost impossible.
I think,
Because they've been so old, and the legal ramification of trying to do that is, it's not even possible.
There's some history with Parks, Trails, and Lakes Commission with the access discussion too. I know, and I can't recall it right off the top of my head, but Jamie may have some things back in the notes. But I know there were some conversations about those access points around the lake.
Yeah, it was pretty high level that there was interest in identifying a handful of them to improve or maintain for the recreation use, whether that's snowmobiling, kayaking, non-motorized use. So there was the conversation and interest in picking 2 or 3, 4 of them that would be best suited for that purpose.
Frequently the question comes up, like, this is a multiple times a year type proposition where somebody will say, hey, you're not doing anything with this anyway, just sell me the 5 feet or the 10 feet or the 20 feet or whatever. And I think that there's so many of these points that negotiated as part of development along, as properties developed throughout the years, as being city access, that to turn back on those is just really challenging, because then it starts this domino question. And I do think that overall it does provide a good public amenity. It might not be an improved public amenity, but it is access to the lake, and for a lot of neighborhoods, it's the kids' swimming hole and the place where they, you know, go out and fish and do all kinds of great things. So if there were reason to close one for a particular reason, I could be open to it, but I think for us to just try to scale down at scale is really challenging, and it really kind of creates this question around the type of value, you know, how would we go about that process? And I'd rather us find a way to better maintain and to better provide public access that they were intended for than to step back, and then we end up with just even more private ownership around the lake. And we've got a lot of that already on our lakes, and I think it'd be nice to be able to allow the public an access point that I'd rather push on better access than limiting access. I think in that evaluation process, we may identify a couple that just no longer make sense for whatever reason, but.
I do want to make it clear, it isn't staff's intention to create some sort of systematic system where we're going to be evaluating these. It's really surrounding around motorized access right now. So we'll have a conversation with the watershed districts, with the Lake Association about motorized access points. It wasn't staff's intention to even be evaluating the addition of more motorized access points. But then when it came to, you know, future uses and those things, those conversations will occur kind of as projects come up, or if there are maybe those requests for vacation. But we weren't going to, it wasn't our intention to create some sort of systematic plan and a program right now for evaluation of these.
Other points of feedback, consideration?
It'll be interesting how the legal eagles view this too, so, you know. But I agree that we have to have, it'd be great to have something in an ordinance that kind of spells it all out. So, happy to hear about that.
Mr. Gretner, anything we haven't said? I'm happy to entertain public comment if you have anything you'd like to provide.
I'd love to comment.
If you want to join us at the podium, you can.
Thank you. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Jerry Grutner, president of the Lake Association. And Abby reached out to me last week and let me know about this meeting, and I appreciated that. And so I did want to come. You know, these lake accesses, I've had several discussions with some staff over the last couple of years, particularly a couple of locations where boats are being launched, you know, and our concerns regarding AIS infestations potentially to the lake and stuff like that. So, I mean, I've looked at each, there's, I think, 43 properties, I think, or somewhere in the 40s, a number of properties that are owned by the city around the lake. And some of them are 5 foot wide and some are 25 feet wide, right? There's a paved access, you know, literally asphalt paved all the way down to the lake that people launch a boat at, you know, which is city-owned. And so I think from a standpoint of having this ordinance, I really applaud, you know, the city to consider this because I think it's something that, unfortunately, you know, Forest Lake is not the community it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. And unfortunately, in the neighborhoods, people kind of think it's their right to, you know, if it's there, they can use it. Well, that may be true. I would hope that at some point that we can look at some of these access points and either decide to, you know, shut them down or to restrict them as to what can be done at those. Several of those accesses are used heavily in the wintertime by ice fishermen. And I don't think neighbors particularly like ice fishermen driving past their house at 2 o'clock in the morning, you know, coming off the lake. I mean, it's a tough situation, but, you know, for the good of the lake and from a standpoint of,
of what's best for the lake itself. I think we would have to have, at some point, even though we have an ordinance in place, we would have to do somewhat of a review of some of these locations to make a right determination. And if we didn't do that, having an ordinance would only be there if you have, a complaint. Well, if you have already signage up, there isn't much to complain about because it's already posted of what could be done there. So anyways, those are my thoughts. We really appreciate it that the city is stepping forward and trying to look at these access points. So thank you.
Thank you for being here. Any other points of feedback? All right, Abby, anything further you need from us?
No, it sounds like generally there's favorability of the council, and we'll kind of look at some of those things just in terms of maintenance and really clearly kind of defining that. And I do want to note that our legal team did draft the ordinance, had worked with all staff. I'm just the front face of it at the moment. Before it comes back to you, we will vet it again through our legal counsel and get something scheduled for you in the near future.
Very good. Thank you. And that will move us on to discussion of the Belts Park Master Plan.
All right, good evening, Mayor and members of the council. I will kick this one off tonight. So at the council's request, we're here tonight to discuss the master plan for Belts Park. And tonight we can use this time to answer any questions you might have. Before we get into that, I just wanted to make note that as the council requested us here tonight, staff did elect to put this on our Parks, Trails, and Lakes Commission meeting for tomorrow evening. So I just wanted to make note that is part of our plan, and we will discuss this again tomorrow evening to gather any additional feedback from the Parks Commission as well. So hopefully between tonight and tomorrow night, we'll have some good, clear direction on our next steps as we continue to move forward in this. So since this project has started, really, there hasn't been any change in the scope of work in the master plan that you've previously seen. We did apply for the DNR grant and were awarded the $300,000. We did just recently receive the final draft agreement from the National Park Service at the end of September. So that would be one item, that I did include in the packet that will eventually be coming forward if council's considerate of that. So really the plan hasn't changed. Staff has consulted with Bolton and Mank to just revisit the phasing schedule and have changed it to a 3-phase approach for many reasons, primarily financial, to improve efficiencies, and to reduce overall project costs. So that's the biggest change before you, is just reviewing that plan for phasing of the project. And since this project has started, thankfully we've had some additional staff resources to join this team. So there are several people here that have been involved in this process that can help answer any questions if I don't have the answer myself. So really tonight, just here to discuss and answer any questions you might have. With that, I'll turn it over to council.
Thank you, Jamie. Could we just step back and kind of walk through the update of the 3-year phasing plan and I understand there's discussion tomorrow with Parks, Trails, and Lakes, and then sequencing of what might be coming in front of them next and what might be coming in front of council next.
Sure, no problem. I will let, in just a minute here, I think Abby's going to pull up the documents provided in the staff memo. I think Abby is going to talk through, from that planning perspective and background, the 3-phase approach, and can kind of guide those next steps and what would be coming back to Parks Commission and council consideration in the future.
And while we're pulling that up, if you recall when we presented the 10-year park plan, basically the financial side of that, we did mention that this would, in order for that fund to remain solvent and have a positive fund balance, this redevelopment had to go to a 3-year plan. There was no, if you went to a 2-year plan, somewhere in that 10-year projection, the fund balance would have gone into negative. This is the only way, as presented, that we can maintain that fund balance, which is what we should be always trying to do.
So just to give a little background, I think the last time the council saw this was maybe earlier this year when staff had come and asked for approval to submit the DNR outdoor heritage grant or outdoor
Outdoor recreation grant.
outdoor recreation grant. And you may remember that the project was kind of split in two phases, a phase 1, phase 2, almost directly down the middle. Some of the changes since that time is we've learned more just about the site. There are some site constraints around those courts up in the north or the upper left-hand corner, southwest corner. Yes, I got it. In the southwest corner, those courts really do need full reconstruction. And when we're coming in and doing some grading work of the property, doing the reconstruction of the courts, doing as much of the grading work as possible is going to help us save costs in the long run. In the two-phased approach, we were really kind of sitting with about $1 million projects. And this 3-year plan would allow us to phase that out into, forgive me if it's two 800,000 and a 600 or an 800 and two 600. I don't remember off the top of my head. But that really helps us get in all of that site grading, stormwater improvements, deconstructing most of the site, constructing all of the stairs, ramps, walkways, and building the tennis courts, volleyball courts, or reconstruction of the tennis courts, volleyball courts, and getting turf restoration in. Then that following spring, so this would be fall of 2023 that we'd be doing that deconstruction, then turning right around in the spring of 2024 and putting in the 2 to 12 playground equipment and installing the building. Then the following year, we'd be removing the 512 playground, installing the 13 plus playground, softball fields, and turf improvements. Part of the plan goal, knowing that we had to kind of move things around a little bit, was to retain the upper playground equipment. It's going to be a 13 plus playground, but keeping this playground that currently serves two ages group 5 to 12 open during the construction of the rest of the park, so that the neighborhood wasn't going to be losing its recreational facilities within the area. So although we do have a significant portion of the site that would be destroyed, I don't want to say destroyed, but reconfigured in late 2023, playground equipment would go in spring of 2024. This playground equipment would still stay in until the spring or summer 2025. But then the entire site would be redeveloped. Is that what you were looking for, Maribel?
Yes, helpful. And then the next stage for this is,
So tonight we're here at your request. Tomorrow night we will also discuss the 3-phased approach with the Parks Commission to give them any additional opportunities for input. We do have 2 contracts for your consideration. One would be the grant agreement for $300,000 from the DNR. That is specific to the 0 to 12 playground equipment, which makes it kind of challenging because it's almost dead center in the property. So that's where we're really trying to late fall phase, get the playground equipment in the spring. If we don't think that 3-phased approach is best, we can explore the 2-phased approach. The challenge that really comes in is reconstructing these courts, getting all these western improvements in, and really, frankly, getting the second phase done because of the financials. Ideally, we'd like to have those agreements right back before you next Monday night, but that is really up to the council. If you approve those agreements, one of the agreements is to enter into final engineering design and contract management services, construction management services with Bolton and Mink. So what it is a portion of the total project, the $2.2 million, is designed for engineering documents, final design, and construction management. So the contract that you see tonight in your packet for quite a bit of money, and I don't remember exactly what it is part of the total project cost. But that would allow then Bolton and Mink to keep moving forward with those final engineering plans and start getting ready for bid for that fall 2023 deconstruction.
248,000.
Thank you.
answer my question on kind of timing and sequence, what happens next. in this three-phased approach that kind of stretches out over essentially 3 seasons, is that right? Do we lose the ball fields for 3 seasons or deconstructed in 1 and then aren't brought back until season 3? Is that the, I'm just trying to.
I can double
get
check.
the
I
impact.
think the field will be, the turf would be established, but I don't know that the actual ball field would be. So we would have them through the fall of 2023. They would go away in late 2023 and then be reconstructed in the spring of 2025. So I think it's really only 1 full season that we would be out. Now, that being said, 2025, when we say we want to construct in the spring, it could be late spring, early summer. You know, it all kind of depends on how that contract ends up that year.
Understand. Other questions that council may have? I know there's a lot of moving pieces coming together at the same time, and this project has been talked about for a long time, so it's nice to see it coming together, and nice to see us getting into the stage of final approvals. I look forward to hearing feedback from the Parks, Lakes, and Trails meeting tomorrow, but I know that staff was also looking for us to have some approvals, at least with some preliminary engineering agreements. So just wanted to make sure that we had kind of full scope discussion before we move into individual contracts. Any other questions or points of clarification?
No, I think I want to reserve some comment until I hear what the Parks, Trails, and Lakes Commission has to say.
Understood.
It appears there's going to be a pretty significant drawdown and their fund balance doesn't look real healthy. I mean, it doesn't look healthy at the end of the project, as healthy as I'd like to see it.
I completely agree with you.
That's concerning to me.
Yep.
So I'm anxious to hear what they have to say about that.
Yep, I think I completely agree with you. It's a very large redevelopment project, and it would be a showcase for, I think, the neighborhood and the community. And unfortunately, those come with very large price tags.
With those concerns, are there some alternatives? Are there some scaling options that are being presented or are being considered that would allow for still a healthy project, but maybe of smaller scale? Is that on the table, or?
We definitely can look at additional phasing options. I think that it's kind of tricky right now with the grant requests that we have. And knowing that these courts really kind of need to be done. There's surface water improvements in throughout the site as well, and vegetation, and that makes it a little tricky, I would say, in it. We can certainly look at probably additional phasing options. I just would be concerned that we would run the risk that we do one thing, and that we wouldn't maybe revisit it.
Understood.
I definitely think that as we're looking at our master planning options and how we're looking at developing our park system in the future, we need to probably keep in mind maybe how big it can get. A big part of this one is we are adding a structure into the site. I do think that that's going to be probably closer to a quarter of the total project cost. Certainly, we can talk about not including the pavilion right now. You know, there's things like that. So if you'd like, Councilmember Bystrom, we can talk about phasing some more with our consultants. I think that it just will it could end up pushing us out a little bit in doing anything next year. We're already getting a little late for doing final construction documents and bidding for 2023 construction.
Well, and I'm even wondering about, leveraging some partnership. The pavilion, for example, we've got a wonderful construction program at the Forest Lake Area High School. Is there a possibility to, work with them? Are there ways to maybe leverage some of the efforts around this?
That is definitely something in a 3-year. It also gives us some more time to really start exploring, to explore partnerships, donations. When we can put some better, more refined numbers against some of these improvements, it gives us a better position to be able to go to the public and say, you know, we have opportunities for you to help invest in your community. Not to say that people have to, but
And to your point too, just, I know that the priority from the community and the Parks, Trails and Lakes Commission has really been around improving access to the park, within the park. So priority has been heavily discussed on the 2 to 12 equipment with several accessible features, port-in-place surfacing, which is accessible surface for anyone in a wheelchair. And then the upgrade to the existing warming house is not accessible at all. So adding the paved trails, that's been the priority. The reconstruction of the courts, as we went through this process, is a pretty hefty tag, and we can continue to fill the cracks, but they're gonna, it's putting a Band-Aid on a big problem. So we, as staff, have decided to not go that route, and that's where that additional expense would come in. So, but given this three-phase approach, it also allows us the time for production of the building and the equipment, and as Abby mentioned, seeking other funding opportunities, leveraging partnerships. So I think from that perspective, it does give staff some additional time. While we're still meeting the grant deadline and requirements of June 30th of 2024 for completing the grant elements.
That's helpful. Don't forget about the wonderful Rotary contribution.
Yes, absolutely. So we do have one contribution also from the Rotary Club that we're really grateful for, and can continue to seek out other ways to partner in the community to help fund the project.
Any other points of discussion or consideration? All right. Thank you for that update. And next, budget update. I almost said quick and then did not mean to, I don't mean to imply anything by budget update. Give us as much as you would like.
Okay, I'll take it down from 2 hours down to 1 hour then. No, it is a quick update. This is an update from some of our budget discussions, and specifically the Water Fund and the American Rescue Plan Act dollars that when we presented that capital plan, how those are going to be used. So with those dollars, there's a lot of guidance and restrictions on what needs to happen when the city decides where to spend those funds. So it's reviewing that guidance and working with our city auditors just to inform council that we will be coming at a future council date to have you pass a resolution regarding the use of those funds specifically. It just provides clarity with how those funds are being used and transparency. So not only the city and the citizens are aware of how those funds are being used. So when we're looking at all the different aspects of how these funds are tied to when they're federal dollars, not trying to get really deep in the weeds here, one of those uses for how we can claim those funds is through lost revenue. Up to $10 million and the guidance can be used for lost revenue claimed, and specifically with that used towards claiming public safety wages. So with that, it's a little confusing, so let me just back up a little bit here. In order for the city to best use those funds to best meet the needs of the cities and the citizens without having to do a lot of administrative work and to tie up those funds further and follow further guidance as required by the guidance, that's how the city would recommend claiming those funds. It's not saying that we're going to be using that to replace lost revenue. We would still use that specifically in the water fund. It is just a mechanism to basically be in compliance with those guidelines that the U.S. Department of Treasury has laid out there, and without further restricting those funds if we went a different route.
Can I say that in my own words and see if I
Yes,
understand?
sorry. I've been trying how to explain this without going down.
So we're
down
going
into
to say
further-
that we are eligible, so the proposal is the city of Forest Lake is eligible for these funds because we incurred public safety dollars
Correct.
during the pandemic of X amount.
Correct.
And that allows us to be eligible to receive the funds.
That's one of the mechanisms that didn't make us eligible for them. That's just one of the mechanisms that we can basically claim and submit to the department saying, we're using these funds for this purpose. And when we do it this way, the city can then decide freely how we want to use this money to best service the citizens and the needs of the city. Without saying, for example, we want to use this for economic development, or we specifically want to use it for water and really lay out the projects. It provides that opportunity for the city to use these funds more freely and how we determine the best need for those funds are.
From that point of eligibility, or we qualify for funds because of those expenses, is there any tie then to the future water projects? Or are you suggesting that we detether those?
That's exactly what we're doing.
That's-
We're applying the funds that were provided by the federal government to reimburse the city for wages at the police department. It's a one-time expense. It concentrates on that. Our reporting is cleaner. It cuts down administrative costs and everything else. It basically frees up the rest, the money that we would have paid out of the general fund for salaries that we can use somewhere else,
Okay.
but not have to report it, not to have a single audit again, and not try to fill out a whole bunch of complicated federal reporting. So it's basically kind of a swap, but it's really an efficient way to use the funds in one use, which will free up funds in another area that we've already presented to you in the water fund when we went over it, that we have to use that $2 million fund to help the water fund.
Can we solicit a letter of, I don't know what this letter would be, but some sort of letter of approval or concurrence from both our city attorney and our auditors, just that in advance, this is our plan, and they say, yes, we
I think we can, I
approve your
think we
plan.
can.
I'm not sure what that letter actually looks like.
I think we can get a compliance from our auditors that this is a way we can do that. I'm not sure the attorneys, no, but I'm sure the auditors could help us explain, or at least keep everybody a little bit sound that this is something we can do.
Yeah.
Well, we know from experience that the guidelines on these things are evolving, and as questions get
Don't we?
submitted,
Yes, we do.
that guidance becomes more
Yes.
clear, and it'd just be good to know up front that that was a
We will ask the auditors to ask for a compliance statement from them that says, yes, this is a method that we can reimburse ourselves.
It'd be nice to have that up front going in.
Sure.
Yeah.
Not a problem.
I've already vetted this with our auditors and have that, so I can just have them maybe memorialize that in a letter before. Because when I've been reviewing all this, I've been on the phone through email with them, confirming that if we went this route, what is this in compliance? What issues do you see with this? What do you need from a city standpoint as far as anything possibly passed ahead of time or approved ahead of time? So yes, Patrick's right, is more of a auditor question than a city attorney question on that, but yes, we can, I can reach out to them, and when we bring something back to council, is have that memo in conjunction with that regarding that compliance.
And the legal eagles, as it was called earlier, will make the resolution that says that we're going to spend the money on whatever we tell you we're going to spend it on, so.
And then from a budget standpoint, though, I'm hearing that we are then going to use those general fund dollars that are freed up to then do.
Which would also be another action by the council to transfer the general funds that we swapped out to the water fund.
Understand. Any questions, points of clarification from council? Excellent. It's a good update. Anything further budget-wise? Don't mean to constrain you.
No, that was all.
Okay, very good. All right, that is the end of our planned agenda for this evening, and nothing further coming before council. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose, and we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.